Hey everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman and welcome to 10 Foot Pole, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 18. Today our guest is Pastor Taylor Dieringer, who is the pastor at Faith Lutheran Church in Austin, Texas.
Hello.
Welcome back, Taylor.
Thank you. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a couple of seasons. Well, I mean, I was letting you get settled in Texas and all those things.
Yeah, I needed time to move to a few different states and never change my license plate. So
now you still have a Texas license plate and you're good to go.
Oh, no. Still for sure a couple states behind on that. So
okay.
Yeah.
You gotta figure it out eventually.
Yeah, it'll happen when
it works. You have to go to an office and take a ticket and stand in line.
My name's changed a couple times since then. It's a whole pain.
Yes, and you have to take all that documentation with you.
I have to remember where it is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of steps involved.
The joys of being an adult.
I love it. Yes.
Well, I'm really excited to have you back, and excited about our topic for today. This is also always one of those juicy topics I love getting into.
Yeah, there's seeds stuff. There's oh, that's my dog whining. You might hear her in the background.
I didn't hear it.
Oh, great. Okay.
But if so, it's fine. We celebrate animals on this podcast.
Yay.
So today we're going to talk about John chapter 12, verses 1 through 8, for Sunday, April 6th, if you're planning on going to a church that follows the lectionary. And it's pretty exciting. I think I'm just going to read it, and then we'll talk about it. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Cool. I'm going to read the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition.
Excellent.
6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. Then they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So there's just a lot happening here. And this is always this is just a fun Lenten gospel lesson, right? As we're leading up to sort of, this is the week right before Palm Sunday. So this, right? This is staring at my
This is right before the triumphal entry.
Mm-hmm.
Right before the triumphal entry in the Gospel of John, also in the lectionary. So it's one of those rare times where the context sort of does match up for us as current worshipers. And then
so sometimes I notice I think a few weeks ago, the Lenten Gospel came out of after the Lord's Supper, and I'm like, why are we? It bothers me when we get out of order.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not in charge of the lectionary, and as I've said before, I'll say it again. I don't really like it, but I don't have a better system, so keep going with it. Anyways, I think just a couple of things to note here to kind of talk about resurrection theology. Mentioned here because Jesus had just raised Lazarus from the dead, and apparently a lot of people talk about Lazarus's resurrection different than Jesus's. As in, it wasn't the same, that he wasn't, either really dead or it was because he, also didn't ascend and go to heaven. I don't know. Just to say that the Greek language would suggest that they are the same.
Yeah. I don't know much about that, especially in the way the Gospel of John talks about it, but I kind of feel we proclaim that God raised Jesus from the dead, and if Jesus is God and Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, it can be the same kind of resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting, like this little like hangout. I mean, what is your life like after you've been resurrected? You know, like I
apparently you
just
just get to
laying around in
recline
your
around
sister's
while your
house.
sisters wait on you. But that might have been the same before he was resurrected too, for all we know.
Well, and I find it hilarious that like right after this, I'd never noticed this before, like getting ready for this podcast. That after this, there's like a plot to kill Lazarus because people
Yeah.
are like, "Oh, he's the reason people are following Jesus,"
Yeah.
which is so funny. Like literally, Jesus just rose him from the dead. So like, if you kill him, that actually just gives Jesus another chance to raise him.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the theology around that. Can you raise someone from the dead more than once?
Is it like a Horcrux where you have a limited number of
Yeah. I
splitting?
disagree. I was thinking cat lives, but that too.
I mean, yeah, no.
The same at seven. Ooh, I never put that together. I wonder if like the Horcruxes being seven is related to the cat lives.
I thought it was 9 lives.
Oh, you're probably right. It is
No,
nine
well.
lives. Never mind. So much for my theories.
Point is, don't come to us for resurrection theology.
Yeah. But something else about like Lazarus's resurrection. So like the question of like why did Mary have this expensive nard anyways? And that she probably had it for
Mm.
Lazarus's burial.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. Yeah.
I don't know if that's you know really
Yeah.
relevant, but like why would she have had it laying around? Well, her brother just died, so
Right. So
they
she's,
probably needed it for that reason.
yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Mm.
Um, I love it. I love like how extravagant this is. And the way she pours that out on Jesus and just kind of like isn't concerned. There's no like scarcity mentality going on here.
Well, there is right from the disciples' perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
And to say so there, Jesus gets anointed like this in all four gospels. In this gospel, it like specifically says Judas is the one who like is objecting to this. In the other gospels, it's just like someone, a disciple, it's not, or the disciples, it's not really named. But to say that like in Matthew and Mark, it just has like generic disciples. But immediately in the paragraph after that is when Judas plots to kill Jesus, right? So like that lines up.
Mhm.
Um, Matthew and Mark also have his head being anointed rather than his feet here in the Gospel of John.
Oh, God,
And
just whatever.
yeah, and the Gospel of Luke is like totally different. Like Jesus gets anointed, but it's not even a remotely related story. It's somewhere else in, in the gospel
Huh.
life, right? It's
Random.
earlier and like
Yeah,
they're in a different place, different people, different things
yeah.
happen, but there is like technically some kind of anointing, which that was,
Yeah, that'd be a fun
I'm
twist.
not sure if I buy that take
Yeah,
just because they both have dads named Simon.
right. Feels like a common name at the time. I
Yeah.
have to.
Hmm.
Hmm.
But here, I'm just going to read a little quote from
Yeah.
this is from Bishop Andy Doyle.
Mm.
Judas is identified in Scripture as the son of Simon. A little family tree from the New Testament scholar J. N. Sanders places Jesus in the house of Simon the leper. Simon the leper is the father to his eldest son, Judas Iscariot, Lazarus, whom Jesus raised, and then Mary and Martha, which makes Judas then a brother of Mary and Martha and Lazarus.
Yeah. I mean, I don't need them all to match up exactly to like find the truth in the story.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it matters easy either.
Yeah.
I mean, like if they were siblings, I think you could say that like there's more to this argument as like a sibling kind of
Mm.
quarrel of
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
but I don't know. I don't know if I buy it, right? Because Judas's response, like, sell it and give the money to the poor, like,
Yeah.
not why not? Like, if it's just their money, it would go back and
Yeah. If it's the family nard, he's like, keep it until the next grandma dies. Like, we're
yeah,
gonna keep
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But I,
But
I mean, in that sense, though, one thing I would maybe liken it to is like the quarrel between Mary and Martha,
yeah,
or housework versus conversational work. Like, what is valuable? What's a valuable way of showing love to Jesus? Like the quality time and conversation, the gift of the oil, the extravagant oil, the hospitality, like I'm thinking in terms of like love languages, I think, but like, and all these kinds. Yeah.
And Jesus, like both times, is like, leave them be.
Yeah, right. Stop worrying about like how this other person is showing their love for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me be the judge of that.
You're into acts of service? Great. Not everyone, that's not everyone's way that they show that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Can I tell you what comes to mind when I read the story this time around?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, I mean, this is like one of those things that's perfect for this podcast because it probably wouldn't be likely to make it into a pulpit sermon. Is I really I'm getting gaslighter boyfriend vibes from Judas in this story. And
Do tell more.
I'm not usually like a huge Judas hater. Like I think, we all mess up sometimes, which also may give you a hint that I have been known to get caught in relationship dynamics where I am making excuses for men that don't need me to be doing that for them. And so this just feels like kind of familiar to me, right? Like using Jesus's own logic against him to say like, how dare you accept this kind of pampering when what you're always saying is that we're supposed to be selling our nice things and giving the money to the poor. I mean, like, I'm not saying this is just me taking devil's advocate. Like, you're the one who said that we're supposed to be about the poor,
Yeah.
Unlike me, Jesus doesn't seem to really be falling for that logic. But what calls my mind to that actually is Mary's act of extravagance towards Jesus as a dear friend, a chosen family member for him. And in the times in my life when my romantic judgment has been questionable. And I've been, in a kind of toxic relationship situation. I think especially about, when I was like 18, dating a shitty college guy, like no one in my life who expressed their like doubts or skepticism about this guy I was dating, like none of them changed the needle for me at all. And if anything, like them being like, I don't know that he's that good for you, made me be like, you don't know him like I do. He's actually great, all of those types of things. And in situations like that and other times in my life, what has changed my perspective has been someone, entirely non-romantic in my life that I know loves me, treating me in a way that felt extravagant to me. Most times I can look back and say like it was just kind of basic levels of human decency, and I was like so used to at the time like taking whatever drop of affection I could get. But like when I was a freshman in college, kind of in this relationship, my dad, who would never ask me or talk about relationships with me at all, took the time to like come to campus, take me out to lunch.
Aww.
Bought a movie ticket, and then even bought me coffee afterwards. None without making me feel guilty that he was spending money on me or that he didn't have enough time and I should feel lucky. Like just like very basic, like, I love you. I want to spend time with you. I'm not worried about spending, this much money on an afternoon together. It made me feel so special. Never once did he mention the guy's name. Never once did he ask about it. Never once did we really even talk about feelings, right? But that act of what felt to a freshman in college like extravagance, like really helped me understand like what kind of love and affection I could even ask for or think of, and it's not like Jesus is choosing to enable Judas in some sort of way. But you can kind of see how, like, this anointing that Mary gives him for what's to come, of course, has this like theological messianic significance.
Yeah.
But also just as like that kind of sustenance you need from the people you love in your life to carry you through
Yeah.
whatever's gonna come.
Like just caring for the human Jesus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Make him feel special for a little bit. Like that's gotta be nice.
Yeah. So uh, on the other side of Judas, right? Like Jesus, I just put their names together.
Jesus.
Yeah. Like this is, I think, a deeply challenging like theological question for us because like we also kind of follow this theology, right, of like this giving and this service, and Jesus says that over and over again, right? So like this is the like one story where he doesn't do that, and so like in John here where Judas says it, and in the other gospels where the other disciples say it, it's I mean they kind of make right. Do they make a good point, right? That if we're supposed to um think about Jesus's and what we hear like preference for the poor and stuff like that,
Yeah.
it does seem kind of off for Jesus's theology.
Hmm.
At least the way I think that we have traditionally read it. Because like, some people then kind of use this, the argument can be made, right, that you're supposed to like attend to people's spiritual well-beings and their soul and stuff and not necessarily like tangible things.
Hmm.
um, right? Because, and I don't think that that's at the point, right? Just Jesus uses most of his ministry to
Yeah.
really address people's tangible needs.
Yeah.
But that is like one perspective.
Yeah.
Um, Dr. Lindsay Jordy wrote a couple of things I really, really enjoyed about this that I wanted to share. It just sort of like we can't separate Jesus from the poor. This idea like that's all he was doing
Yeah.
was leading this example of like these tangible needs.
Mm.
And what she says about Jesus' response is that we may be reading it wrong.
Oh.
There's a funny thing in ancient Greek. This is what they say. Sometimes the present in indicative form of a word
Hmm.
just which just indicates or states something such as you always have the poor with you matches the present imperative form of the word, which commands you to do something. So it could be have or keep the poor with you always.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it would look the exact same if Jesus says you have the poor with you always or keep the poor with you always.
Ah,
So
yeah,
maybe we should read Jesus' statement as not an indication of the way things are, but rather a command. Have the
yeah,
poor with you always, or keep the poor with you always.
I like that.
So then, though he is leaving, his mission does remain the same, right? Keep the poor with you always. So perhaps a statement which has been used to justify the disregard for the poor, as we often interpret this of Jesus, is actually a direct command to always have Jesus's mission for and among the poor at the forefront of our thoughts.
Mhm.
To
Mhm.
keep the poor. I am leaving, but keep the poor with you always. Have the
Yeah,
poor with you always.
yeah, yeah.
And
I
and
was
I
gonna say,
and I like that kind of different. Like to me, that's a good. I mean, that's an exegetical like game changer for me and how Jesus's response to this situation.
absolutely. And the yeah, and it's like very it kind of continues the argument with Judas or reveals like what Jesus sees,
Yeah.
which is kind of his true intent, at least the way the Gospel of John outlines it, is outlines it is like, you know, I know you're not asking this for the right reasons,
Yeah.
and in some ways can also come across as like oh yeah, like what have you done for the poor lately? Like,
Yeah.
okay, show me, right? Like, or bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And so, like, is Judas being snarky or like is he being
yeah,
genuine? And it seems that like the
yeah,
author of the Gospel of John is more on the snarky side, right? Because we get those little indicators. Like he's not saying this because he cares about the poor. he's saying this because he wants to line his own pockets because he is the one that controls the money in their little gang. Um, and so, I mean, that's an extra addition in the Gospel of John, like, right? Like that doesn't show up in the other two stories.
Right, right. Well, and I think like one way to interpret Judas with best intentions here, which, the author of the Gospel of John is not necessarily doing, um, is his job in on this team
Mm-hmm.
is to keep the purse, is to keep the money that they need to do to feed the poor, to do their ministry, all of that kind of stuff. And he is working out of this assumption that might be true that they're going to run out of money to do the
Yeah.
things they need to do and want to do.
Well, maybe right, because he thinks they're going to be at it a lot longer than they actually
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. And I've heard interpretations elsewhere that kind of say like Judas took the money he did to betray Jesus, sort of in good faith that they could use that money to continue their ministry, not knowing that he was being negotiated with in bad faith. Can you tell I've been watching a lot of Suits lately? Um, and that he kind of ended up getting like double crossed almost, and that this, Judas didn't intend for things to go that way, but by operating out of the scarcity mindset, like he ended up handing Jesus over.
Yeah. I've preached a sermon about that before too, in a similar fashion of sort of eighth commandmenting Judas, of giving him the benefit of the doubt, right? Like we don't get to know like what was going on. Was he trying to just manage their finances? Was he, thinking that Jesus has turned away from what he believes that, or what, is his message, right? Does he
Yeah.
believe that Jesus is, this response here, right? Of sort of like Jesus accepting this extravagance is like, Jesus is the one who's losing the plot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, does he have like some external, like familial need that he needs money, right? Like to
Right.
take care of his family. We don't know. We don't know any of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is
And,
one thing for the Gospel of John here. So we get this snippet, right, that he's about to betray him, and that he's greedy. But this idea of like he betrayed Jesus because Satan entered into his heart, that hasn't happened yet.
oh, yeah, true. Hmm. How long does it take for that to
Oh, it
kind
happens
of?
in the next chapter
Okay.
because it
Okay.
happens at the Last Supper.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like it hasn't happened yet. And so is this kind of foreshadowing that like
Yeah.
that's what he's going to be, or is there a sense that like he's always been this guy,
Mm.
and the maybe that's why the devil went for him, or uh
Or
maybe
even, is this a moment that the devil calls back to and says, like, your guy's really kind of a hypocrite? I mean, remember what he did with the nard thing?
yeah, the little talking heads on the shoulders of like the
Yeah, right.
heel and the yep.
It's like, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. He sure talks about the poor a lot, but when it was his feet getting oiled up.
Yeah, exactly.
And not to mention this, well, sorry, this is actually quite the topic shift.
Oh, I want to
But
hear it.
when it comes to foot stuff, uh, it's just as, if not more, kind of like intimate in
It's
ancient
super
times as
intimate.
it is today, right? To be interacting with someone's feet. Intimate in the sense that, like, and also like the dirtiness of feet in sandals era is just like it's vulnerable in that way that this is like the grossest part of yourself that you are sharing with someone else.
But it's like super intimate. Think about how she uses her hair to wipe it. Like, can you get more like
It's hot, it's steamy,
yeah.
yeah, very. And this is the same gospel, and the only gospel I think where Jesus washes the disciples' feet.
Hmm.
And so we do see that he's not like in it for himself, or, only going to keep this extravagant love for himself.
Hmm.
And also in the moment, Judas doesn't know that. That hasn't happened yet. Like, this
Well, we
is
don't hear that he uses expensive perfume on their feet, just water.
that's true. And that's because he had sold it all by that point.
But this whole thing of like how intimate it is, like it is almost like erotic. That's a really uncomfortable topic for people to think about because it's like people like to put Jesus in sort of the asexual category.
Yeah, yeah.
That like he definitely wouldn't have been married, wouldn't have touched women, wouldn't have done any of the above, that he didn't have any sexual desires or anything like that. Like, we don't like to talk about Jesus and sex. That is the most uncomfortable. I think that is the most uncomfortable topic that you can ever bring up with people at church.
Probably. Yeah. Yeah.
Which, oh, it's at home. One of my favorite books is the Book of Longings by Sue.
Yes. I was just thinking
Which
of
like
that.
specifically talks about like the whole story is about a woman named Anna who is Jesus's wife. And
Yes.
at the very end of the book, like, right, like the author did all of her exegetical and theological research, and that, like, there is no reason Jesus wouldn't have had a wife. And for very good reasons, to be a good, law abiding Jew as the eldest son in his family, he would have been married.
Huh. Yeah.
That it would
And
have been either a sin or taboo or him not to be married,
yeah. Yeah. Well,
which
and
I
some
find a fascinating take.
hmm hmm Yeah, because it really gets to the heart of is is sex inherently
Human.
or yeah, or just inherently human. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And so much of the New Testament passages are so informed by Greek ideas about body, soul being good, that kind of thing. That we equate a lot of that with theology, when a lot of that really just reflects the culture of the time.
Yeah.
So, we have all of these verses and things about like the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, and like the flesh is what gets us in trouble. When God became human on purpose, God entered the world through a cervix, like that. And that was like, God didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
God did not have to do it that way. And so like the embodied nature of Jesus's life on earth, it is so much of the embodied human experience for so much of humanity, for so much of history, includes sexual attraction and desire and engagement. I mean, and even like, hugs, like just the stuff that connect our bodies to one another, like that build our relationships, when it gets too close to the bedroom, just gets so deeply uncomfortable for people.
I actually think we like really sell Jesus as who he was as a fully human person when we like separate him from his human body.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And just what you're saying, like God chose to enter the world this way and to be human and all that that comes with. And so I think that like we really sell Jesus short and cut our theology off at the knees when we separate Jesus, his ministry, his divinity, and his life
Yeah.
from also being human.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And what that would have included, right?
Yeah. And to bring it back to my own dating history, like I really, like, as a teenager, really struggled with my faith when I was going through breakups, which as a teenager felt like the end of the world, right? And just tore me apart in all kinds of ways. And I just remember praying, like, I don't know if it was to God or to no one at all. Like, there's no way you can really know what it's like to be me, because there's no stories about Jesus having breakups in the Bible. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and you don't even know what it feels like according to the Bible, and those stories of crushes and heartbreaks and all those things, don't need to make it into scriptures. That's not,
There's some of it
necessarily.
in there, but you got to look outside Jesus.
Right, right.
Because again, we've put Jesus into a really asexual box.
Yes, yes. Um, and I mean, I think ultimately I prefer the spaces that are left around Jesus's sexuality that's open. There is nothing saying he was married. There's nothing saying he wasn't.
Yeah.
That there is a lot more room to fill in the gaps with research and imagination and all those different kinds of things. Because I think if it was super specific, it would maybe even be harder to translate into modern times and all the different forms that love can take. So, yeah, but it's tough,
I was just thinking, like, right, if Jesus is asexual, that does make him a part of the LGBTQ community. So
absolutely, like I
yes,
think it's super possible,
we
and
just
also
unrelated to the text have just officially classified Jesus as queer. So that's fun.
and
By
like
by historical Christian tradition, by the way.
yep,
So
yep, and Jesus could have been asexual and also forced to get married based on Jewish custom, right? Like there's,
also true. Yep. Mm-hmm.
like any number of these things could be true. Jesus could have been queer in lots of different ways and still forced to marry a woman based on Jewish custom, right? So,
Mm-hmm. And
um,
I mean, just left his wife at home because
yeah,
that's the last thing you
absolutely.
need is a woman traveling out on the road with you and 12 other guys.
Well, and what's kind of neat about the Book of Longing, and then there's another one I read for a class in seminary. That's kind of a similar, like, imagining of a fictional account of Jesus's ministry. That's like a lot of women and children and mothers would have been
Yep.
on the journey at certain parts along the way. Maybe not the whole time, but
I
like,
don't think that's fiction. I think that's just true. Like, I think that
yeah,
there
yeah,
was
yeah.
a whole entourage that went with it, but like, because it's a super masculine patriarchal society and rendering of the story, right? Like, it only matters that the men were there.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If the women who were there were part of the house of
Yeah.
Andrew, the house
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
all
That's
the
that's what they got. But so to say then about all the other characters here, right? Like what does it look like of, Martha's doing the service. And I just love that like Lazarus is just reclining. He's
oh my God. Yeah.
just along for the ride, He's
I'm dying. It's exhausting.
yeah. Oh
He
man,
literally just woke up. So
I
like
mean I feel like dying would be exhausting. And then having to come back to life.
Lazarus, the benefit of the doubt. He has had a day. Yeah. Yeah.
But I find it interesting here in the Gospel of John versus the other two Gospels that tell this story that like it is specifically Judas that's calling him out, and this extra need to this, and I like that in our modern English versions they put in parentheses. He said this not because he cared about the poor, right? Like that the translators decided that that was like an inside thought.
Hmm.
Um, I think there's this one of the like accounts I follow on Instagram like talks about like just like fun quotes for ADHD people, and one of
Yeah.
them is, and I didn't realize that I did this until I read this, and I'm like, oh my god, I do this all the time, where every thought has another inside thought, and like
Yeah.
ADHD people then like add it in parentheses, right? And I looked back to my emails, I'm like, oh my god, I do that all the time. I have my outside thought, and then I put my inside thought in parentheses and
Yeah.
add it to the
Oh,
email. Mm-hmm.
all the time. All the time. I am known to start an inside thought and then double parentheses, an extra inside thought. It's like
Nice.
the Russian nesting dolls of thoughts.
Yeah. I usually just add commas. That's better. I like it. The
It's better
Russian
than words.
nesting dolls of inside thoughts. So I
Yeah, yeah.
wonder then, like with translators, because again, so the original manuscripts wouldn't have any sort of punctuation or anything that, like, whoever translated this was like, this is an inside thought.
Gosh, I don't remember enough about grammar to
Or
Greek
why
grammar.
they decided to put those parentheses there. Like, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like it wasn't in there and was added later. Though it might have been, truthfully, it could have been something that
Wow.
was also added later as
But it's
a,
not that kind of bracket when they
yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's translating this would probably be terrible because there's a lot, like the sentence structure here. That's not what we're here for, but there's just a lot of like
the sentence structure all over the Bible is horrible. And part of that has to do with translation. And part of it has to do with, like, again, these original languages didn't have punctuation.
Yeah, yeah.
It was just, everything was just one run-on sentence. You just had to, like, intuitively know where the sentences ended and new ones started.
Can I jump back to something when we were talking about Lazarus lounging?
Yeah.
What if this anointing of Jesus's feet is like the celebration? Like this is the Lazarus is alive party.
Yeah.
And this is like a thank you gift.
Yeah, it's done in gratitude.
You know, and maybe my retort to Judas might be, what price would you put on your brother's life? Yeah, maybe this isn't too expensive for, you know, nothing, but he did just save my brother's life, you know?
Well, and really, like, save their family. Like, think about, like, familial structures, right? If their dad was deceased, right? So Lazarus then being the, like, head of the household would have put those two women in quite a debacle, if he had died.
Absolutely.
And so, like, that stands to reason for me, right? This, like, thank you, and, like, not only, like, yes, gratitude for, you know, for your brother's life and the love and stuff that goes with that, but also, you know, financially.
Gives them their life. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are, we're engaging at our church right now with some resources from Samud, which is a program out of the ELCA, like, you know, Lutheran church wide in America that works with the Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Lands. It's called Samud, Justice for Palestine and Israel. And their Lenten series, they have an awesome Lenten series out right now. And so they talked about the way that Palestinian Christians are really clinging to Jesus' words in the wilderness, man shall not live by bread alone, that Jesus echoes to the desert. And that if it was just about bread alone for Palestinian Christians right now, they might leave, right? They might leave the land. They might find somewhere safer, somewhere better, somewhere where they have better human rights, right? And God desires more for us than just to have our basic human needs met, just to have those practical things met. And so this is, in a lot of ways, kind of highlighting, you know, for Jesus, for Lazarus, for Mary and Martha, that like their dignity, their agency as, you know, the main characters of their own lives, is as important to God, if not more important to God, than like having literal life restored, having bread to feed the poor, having money to pay the bills, right? You know, that those things like matter enough to God. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that. It's easy to lose sight of like, I think even at a congregational level and sometimes at an individual level, we can spend a lot of time beating ourselves up like, I'm not doing enough to help people, I'm not saving the world enough, I'm not fixing other things like enough. Don't tell me to go worry about self-care, don't tell me to, you know, pour into this community and our faith formation or whatever. There's still work to be done out there. And this is almost like a call into some sort of Sabbath, like the work's always going to be there. Spend the time with God that you need to, spend the time with Christ that you need to be restored. And that's going to be a mutually beneficial thing for everyone.
Well, and I think that goes along with the idea of like, you know, Judas being like the man that holds the purse strings, of thinking about, you know, there's every congregation has a treasurer that's being like, do we really need to spend money on this? Is this where we need to put our funds, right? Or is this more important? Or like, no, we can't spend money on that. Or, you know, just really, you know, drawing that line.
Yep. And we need people in the body of Christ to be asking those questions, especially if they're asking in good faith. if they really are just asking questions and then willing to listen to the answer, you know. And it's when I'm just asking questions turns into, a lot more insidious intentions, which we hear across the board, in all different kinds of settings, not just religious settings, that we start to kind of perk our ears up and go, not so sure about that.
Yeah. I even think about like giving and sometimes how people give money to the church and then, kind of claim it as ownership.
Yeah.
Sort of like, well, I don't want my money to go towards that.
Yeah.
Or, or even just thinking they can, control the church because they give money or like, especially like large donors, right? That like, I give this substantial portion of money and this is what I want the church to do.
Yep.
And we can run into kind of those kind of problems too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So like why, to me, that brings up a question of like giving, like why are you giving?
Yeah.
Are you giving out of generosity and faith, or is it giving out of having that sense of control and power?
Yeah. Well, here,
And that can be hard to identify, right? Like within ourselves, right? Like
it's probably always a little bit of both.
Yeah. We are indeed still human.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, I think such a, I would love to hear this preached as almost like a stewardship text or like a fundraising text, like Mary's not putting coins in the coin purse, but she is giving generously,
Yeah.
like, forget the 300 denarii to give to the poor. Like Mary and Martha and Lazarus could probably use that 300 denarii for themselves. And she's foregoing, what would you call that? Like a lost or cost, I don't know enough financial terms, but she's foregoing the opportunity to make money off of this nard and instead giving it generously to Jesus. Now, maybe it's a sexual favor and that's how she's getting something in return, but but it's not clear from this story that she's doing this for any reason other than to anoint this Messiah who's about to. And Messiah literally means anointed one. And so in the Gospel of John, like this is the moment when Jesus' true identity is affirmed. Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea too about out of gratitude, right? Like,
yeah,
you give gifts, acts of service and stuff out of gratitude as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, so much to unpack in this. And we were all over the place.
Yeah.
But, there's some good nuggets of good things in there somewhere. So thanks for everyone who stuck with us through this fun, erratic conversation. And if there are preachers out there, good luck. Just go look at the map, make sure I'm not preaching. Yeah. Okay.
I am. So good luck to me. Like I'm out of it.
All right. Thank you so much, Taylor, for joining us for this. I appreciate your wisdom and your thoughts and adding to this fun conversation.
Always a pleasure.
Yes. Remember, everyone, that you can learn more about the podcast at 10footpolepodcast.com and find us on Facebook and Instagram at 10footpole podcast and wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, the 10footpole podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org. Take care.
Woo.